learning produce graduates who are work ready. That's the key phrase, work ready. Well, to answer that important question, a symposium on education, training and development is to be held this month. Among other things, I'm told, it's going to look at what needs to be done to prepare graduates for alternative ways of coping if they don't find work. Well, for more on that, we're joined by author, speaker and training consultant Claude Phiri. He is the convener of the symposium. Good afternoon to you. I'm so pleased that you come in on a day when we've just announced these shocking unemployment figures. And I guess the question that is begged is the deficit, the gap between training and the workplace, and whether education institutions themselves are partly to blame, perhaps, because they're not producing the right people.
Exactly. It's an opportune time, I guess, because those stats have just come out this morning. It only takes a few minutes. Take a look at Job Mail. Take a look at tomorrow's Star, for instance. You take a look at Career Junction. Even for very entry-level jobs, they will say to you they want 3 years, 2 years, or 1 year's worth of experience. That suggests something. By the time the graduate comes out of college or university, the employer doesn't trust this graduate to the extent that they would let them work without having done some experience elsewhere.
But what's the problem? I mean, if they've gone through an intensive tertiary qualification, they've passed. Yes. They should be well schooled then in the subject in which they have studied. Yep. Why don't employers trust them?
That's a good question. There's a big difference between education and training, for instance. Education gives you knowledge. Training gives you skills. It's those skills that come as a result of training and continuous development that you require. And there's a disjoint between what the universities and other institutions of higher learning are producing compared to the needs and the requirements of the workspace.
Is it the university's fault? Are they simply not keeping pace with the demands that the workplace is making of the people coming into the workforce?
It may sound simplistic, but I think that the two are not talking. The universities and institutions of higher learning are producing graduates every year. And on the other side, the employers are also looking for skills that would help them achieve their goals. Maybe the two need to come together, hence an occasion like this one where we want to bring together academics, employers, and a few people from the policy and regulatory framework side of things so that we can engage the 3 or the 4 different stakeholders.
So let's take this down a level if we can. I think you've sketched the broad philosophical concept. So let's assume I am a Bachelor of Commerce graduate. I've just left the University of the Witwatersrand or Pretoria, whatever the case is. I'm armed with my degree.
Yes.
What am I lacking?
If you're sitting as an employer, they will say to you, you must have 2 years' experience to do that job or the other job.
But hasn't that always been the case, though?
Yeah, and that shouldn't be, which means the training that you have done or the education that you have received hasn't fully equipped you for the job that you must.
But you can't blame the employers. They are well within their right, surely, to want to employ someone who has a degree of skill and experience.
Exactly. And that's where we are talking about the two speaking the same language, at least speaking to each other, so that the institutions of higher learning should evolve as the needs of the skills evolve in the workspace. Let me give you an example. We are talking about the 4th industrial revolution now. We're talking about technology taking over jobs. We're talking about artificial intelligence and all of that. Are institutions of learning evolving at the same speed? If you had a son who goes to the same school that you went 5 years ago, assuming that were possible, it's likely that the curriculum that you studied is going to be exactly the curriculum that your son or your brother studies now. But in the 5 years between the time that you were at these same institutions and the time that your brother goes, things have changed and the curriculum remains the same. So maybe there's need for us to revisit and rethink.
So it's two things. On the one hand, it's a curriculum issue, and it would be incumbent upon institutions of higher learning to make sure that they are recalibrating that curriculum all the time. I accept that. But it's that deficit of necessary skill when you sit behind the desk and perhaps you're client-facing. And are they simple skills? Is it simply how to deal with a meeting, how to compile a report, how to read a spreadsheet? Is it as simple as that?
It's that and many more. And I think it depends on what the requirements of the specific employer group require. Because if these were speaking to, say, particular institutions of learning, they would then request that these skills be imparted onto the graduates by the time they leave to shorten the need for you as a bachelor's, in your example, BCom bachelor's, BCom degree, to almost hit the road running when you then get a job.
What I'm also hearing is that maybe the employers are abrogating that responsibility to the tertiary institution. Surely there's got to be a process of skills transfer and orientation in the workplace itself. I would suggest to you that many employers simply say, well, we don't want to do that. We simply want someone who can get going as quickly as possible. Exactly. Because we have urgent needs.
In fact, one of the speakers at the symposium is going to address that. From the HR specialization, HR practitioner perspective, what is it that they can do to ensure that this is addressed? Because maybe they are not addressing some of the questions that must be addressed. And hopefully in this sort of meeting where all 3 or 4 stakeholders are in one place, hopefully some of those challenges can be addressed. And hopefully we can create conversation.
Claude Phiri, not to take anything away from the importance of this, because it's a problem that is experienced in organizations all over South Africa. But it all comes down to funding, really, is that the universities will say, great idea, we've got to pay for this bridging education. Employers themselves are going to say, it's an additional cost which we simply don't have.
Maybe what needs to happen is realigning that same budget to scratch where it itches. Give the skills that the employers are looking for rather than additional budget per se.
Finally, I'm always very cynical of symposiums like this because a lot of hot air comes out of them.
Yeah.
What's a win for you in terms of moving this debate forward?
To create that conversation, to start that conversation, and we will take the conversations forward with all the stakeholders. There will be other meetings, or follow-up meetings or symposium, as the case may be, depending on what comes out of this first one, so that then the conversation carries on until we can get to policymakers, to curriculum developers that will then start to tweak the development of what they offer to our graduates.
Sounds like an awfully long, laborious process. Do we have the time for this? It's got to happen now, surely.
At least we'll get the first step. And obviously there will be many other follow-up actions and needs, but we get the first step, get them to talking to each other. Can employers speak to institutions of higher learning? What about institutions that, for instance, are regulators in the HR space? Can all 3 start to speak? That's what we are hoping to achieve.
And it's your belief there is a willingness for those different parties to talk to each other?
There definitely is. There definitely is. We've been engaged with a number of them from the different spheres, and there definitely is the willingness to speak and find ways forward.
Claude Phiri, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.